Welcome back, adventurers. Today, we continue building our knight's journey. We'll enhance our gameplay by refining code with functions, managing inventory, and introducing new challenges that will make the adventure even more exciting. So grab your sword, ready your shield, and let's dive back into the world of Eldoria. As you've noticed, some of our actions like changing gold or healing are being repeated throughout our game. This is the perfect moment to introduce functions. By turning these repeated actions into functions, we make our game more organized and much easier to manage. So let's write a couple of functions, one to handle changes in health and another to manage gold. Let's start by creating a change health function. This function will take an input, let's call it amount, which will either increase or decrease the knight's health, depending on whether they're healing or taking damage. Not only will it update the health value, but will also include a check to ensure that the knight's health doesn't go above the maximum, which in our case is 100. If the health exceeds 100, we'll cap it there and print a message to let the player know that their health is maxed out. After each change, we'll print the knight's current health so they always know their status. Here's how it looks. But wait, there's something we need to address. We're trying to modify the health variable, but remember, health was defined outside of this function. By default, Python treats variables inside the function as local, meaning they only exist within the function itself and can't affect variables outside of it. To fix this, we need to tell Python that the health variable we're using inside the function is the same one we define globally, outside the function. This is where the global keyword comes in handy. The global keyword tells Python that the health variable inside the function refers to the global health variable. This way, we're not just creating a local version of the variable, but directly modifying the original health value we set earlier in the game. By using the global keyword, we ensure that every time we call change health, it updates the knight's actual health, not just a local copy. Now, let's move forward and implement the same concept for modifying gold. And there you have it. Now, instead of repeating the same code for changing health or gold, we can simply call these functions whenever we need to adjust the knight's stats. This makes our code cleaner, easier to read, and much more efficient. Now, what happens if our brave knight's health or gold drops to 0? Well, the adventure has to come to an end. If your health hits 0, it's game over. You've been defeated on your journey. But if your gold reaches 0, you'll be forced to return to the kingdom, ending your adventure prematurely. Let's add some conditions to check for these scenarios. With this function, we'll check whether the knight's health or gold has fallen to 0. If either one does, the game ends. This gives our knight a clear goal, not just to succeed in battles and quests, but to manage their resources wisely. It adds that extra layer of challenge to the adventure. We use this function at the end of every cycle after we choose what to do. As our knight continues their adventure, they'll collect various items to help them along the way, potions, treasures, and more. We'll use a list to store the items the knight finds and a dictionary to describe the effect of each item, such as restoring health or adding gold. This way, the player can pick up and use items to change their stats during the adventure. We already have an empty inventory list. Do you remember it? Next, let's define a dictionary where each item has a name, a description of what it does, and the specific stat it affects. Now, when the player finds an item during exploration, we'll add it to the inventory and inform them about the item, including the description. For example, if the knight finds a healing potion, we'll call the function like this. This will add the potion to the inventory and provide the description from the dictionary. Finally, we can display the player's current inventory, including the items and their descriptions. This way, players can always check their inventory and see a clear description of each item. For instance, if they have a gold nugget and a healing potion, they'll know exactly what each item does based on the description and the stat it affects. Now, we're going to add two exciting features to our game, the ability to find random items while exploring and the option to use these items during encounters. Let's first give our knight the option to view and use items from their inventory when an enemy appears. When an enemy appears, the player will now have three options: fight, flee, or check their inventory. If they choose to view their inventory, they can then select an item to use, like a healing potion. To add this, we'll modify the part of the game where the player decides their course of action during combat. We'll add a third option, 3, to check the inventory. This allows the player to view their current inventory and decide whether or not to use an item. The use item function will modify the knight's stats based on the item used. Here is the function. The use item function is where the real magic happens. It's the key to how items can impact your knight's adventure. Let's walk through what it does step by step. First, when you use an item, the function checks the type of item you've chosen. If it's a potion, for example, the function will call change health and pass in the value tied to that item's effect, boosting your knight's health by the specified amount. On the other hand, if the item is a treasure, it will increase your knight's gold by calling the change gold function. Each item type has its own unique impact on the character's stats, whether it's restoring health or adding more gold to their pouch. Now, when we talk about modifying the knight's stats, it's these change health and change gold functions that come into play. They directly adjust your knight's health or gold based on the effect of the item. So if your knight is in a tight spot and uses a health potion, you'll see their health jump up by the item's effect, helping him to fight on or explore further. After the item has been used, it's immediately removed from the inventory. This ensures that each item can only be used once, making it all the more important to decide carefully when to use each one. And to keep the player informed, the function prints out a message confirming that the item has been used and is no longer in the inventory. This real-time feedback lets the player know how their choices are affecting the game as it unfolds. To allow the player to check their inventory during an enemy encounter, we need to add a loop within the fight. This way, if the player decides to use an item from their inventory, they can do so, and then return to the encounter to choose their next action, be it using another item, fleeing, or continuing the fight. To achieve this, we'll introduce a flag called isFighting. Initially, we'll set isFighting to false, then, whenever the player encounters an enemy, we set isFighting to true. This flag will control the loop that runs during the fight. Once the player chooses to either fight or flee, we need to ensure the loop ends appropriately. After the player achieves either a victory or defeat, or if they decide to flee, we'll set isFighting back to false. This way, the loop will exit and the player can move on to the next stage of their game. Next, let's add the ability to find random items during exploration. This will happen during the player's adventures. Sometimes they'll encounter an item instead of an enemy, gold, or nothing at all. To do this, we'll add a new event to our list of possible encounters. In this case, when the player encounters treasure, we'll randomly select an item from the items dictionary and add it to the inventory. The player will receive a message about the item and its description, just like we did earlier. By integrating these two features, we make the game more interactive. Players will need to manage their inventories wisely, choosing when to use items to their advantage during combat or exploration. Great job, Brave Knights! You've made fantastic progress today by adding more depth and interactivity to our game. With functions to manage health and gold, an inventory system for items, and new challenges to conquer, your knight's adventure is coming to life. We're getting close to the final version of our game. Keep practicing, keep coding, and stay tuned for the next part. Until then, happy coding, and I'll see you in the next dimension.